Picture this, a lonely trucker driving through the endless, dark roads of California. Every mile brings new terror, mysterious figures, ghostly voices, and an overwhelming feeling that something's always watching. As he pushes forward, strange things happen. Hitchhikers who disappear, trucks that seem to follow him, and a chilling sense that these roads aren't just empty, they're cursed. With each new story, the fear intensifies, and the trucker's worst nightmares come to life. Will he survive, or will he become part of the road's dark history? Watch until the end for all 10 terrifying tales, and discover the true horror behind the wheel. Story 10. The long haul of fear. The moon hung low over the California highway, casting long, eerie shadows across the vast desert. The sound of tires humming against the asphalt was the only noise in the trucker's cab, his thoughts as empty as the road before him. A stretch of highway known only as Highway 71 sprawled out in front of him, an endless stretch of isolation. For miles, there was nothing but the black expanse of desert on either side, with only the occasional rustle of dry wind sweeping through the sagebrush. Eddie Harris, a seasoned trucker who had spent more than half his life on the road, wasn't scared of much anymore. He'd been down every highway, driven through every storm, and seen things most people would only ever hear about in stories. But tonight, something felt off. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension, like a storm was coming even though the sky above was clear. Eddie took a long drag from his cigarette and flicked the butt out the window, watching it disappear into the night. His fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Just get to the delivery, Eddie," he muttered to himself, trying to calm his nerves. The GPS showed he was nearing the end of his route, a final delivery that would put him on a plane back home to Texas. It was supposed to be a simple job, nothing out of the ordinary, but something about this stretch of highway felt cursed. He'd heard the whispers from other drivers. Highway 71, the stretch of road where trucks sometimes went missing and drivers vanished without a trace. People who drove through that part of the desert never came back the same, or they never came back at all. It was all just rumors, Eddie told himself. Truckers liked to tell tall tales to make the night feel less lonely. But then again, he had seen his share of strange things on the road, things that couldn't be easily explained away. The night seemed to drag on, the dark sky stretching endlessly in front of him. The truck's headlights cut through the darkness like a knife, but no matter how far he drove, there was nothing ahead, just empty road and the occasional patch of sparse vegetation. Flicker of movement caught his eye in the rearview mirror. Eddie's grip tightened on the steering wheel, and his eyes narrowed. There was another truck behind him. It wasn't just any truck, though it was a huge, black rig, its headlights blinding in the rearview mirror. The kind of truck you didn't forget. It was so close now, almost right on top of him, tailgating dangerously. "Damn it," Eddie muttered. He wasn't in the mood for road rage tonight. He sped up, hoping to lose the truck in the vast emptiness of the desert, but no matter how fast he went, the truck stayed right there, close, too close. Eddie's stomach churned. There was something unsettling about the way the other truck moved so smoothly, like it was part of the night itself. The black rig seemed to glide along the road, as if it had no weight, no true form. The headlights gleamed in the mirror, but the truck's outline remained vague, distorted by the desert heat and the shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally long across the asphalt. "Get off my tail," Eddie muttered, trying to shake the truck. He changed lanes, floored the gas pedal, and watched as the black rig shifted to match his speed. No matter what he did, the truck remained behind him. His heart began to race. Something wasn't right. Eddie looked at the dashboard clock. It was nearly 2 a.m., far too late for a convoy. He'd been on this road for hours and had only passed a few cars. There was no way there should be another truck out here, let alone one following him so closely. The feeling of dread slowly crawled up his spine, his palms sweating as he clenched the steering wheel tighter. He could barely make out the faint outline of the other truck in his rearview mirror now. The shape no longer distinct, just a shadow that seemed to bend and distort in the light. Eddie's breath caught in his throat as the truck suddenly veered into his lane, coming dangerously close. He swerved instinctively, and the truck followed, staying in step with his every move. Panic surged within him. His pulse quickened, and the familiar buzz of adrenaline flooded his system. Was this some kind of sick prank? Had someone been following him for miles, just to mess with him? The thought seemed absurd, but as he glanced at the rearview mirror, the reality set in. The truck behind him wasn't a regular vehicle. Eddie's heart skipped a beat as he caught a glimpse of the driver. But it wasn't a person he saw. It was something far worse. The driver's seat was empty. There was nothing but darkness where the driver should have been. His breath caught in his throat. The lights of the truck began to flicker, casting long, disjointed shadows across the road. The figure, or lack of one, loomed in the mirror, as if watching him, waiting. The sudden realization hit him like a cold slap in the face. He wasn't just being followed, he was being hunted. In a panic, Eddie slammed his foot on the gas, accelerating faster than he ever had before. The truck ahead of him seemed to grow in size, its headlights blinding. The road stretched out before him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was no way out. The truck behind him seemed to be closing the distance, faster and faster, and Eddie could hear the unmistakable sound of tires screeching against the road as if the black rig was matching his every move. He could barely breathe now, a cold sweat soaking his clothes as his knuckles turned white from gripping the wheel too tightly. Was it real? Was this just a bad dream? Eddie couldn't tell. The world around him seemed to blur, as though the road had no end. The truck's lights grew brighter, so bright they were blinding now. Eddie slammed his foot down even harder, swerving wildly as he tried to evade the unrelenting pursuit. He could feel the pressure building, the air growing heavier, as though something was suffocating him. He glanced once more at the rearview mirror. The black truck was gone, vanished. For a fleeting moment, Eddie thought he'd escaped. Then the road ahead of him changed. It wasn't just the landscape, it was everything. The asphalt turned to gravel, the familiar signs of the highway disappeared, and the temperature dropped, sending a chill through Eddie's bones. His truck's headlights flickered, and the dashboard lights began to dim. The engine sputtered, as if it was struggling to stay alive. Eddie slammed his fist against the steering wheel. What the hell is going on? The road before him stretched on endlessly, but now it was not the familiar highway he had been driving on for hours. It was something else, something wrong. The surroundings were distorted, unfamiliar. The desert now looked like a graveyard of rusted vehicles, old trailers, and broken down rigs. Shadows stretched unnaturally long in the dim light, and then it hit him. He was no longer on Highway 71. He was somewhere else. Panic surged once more. The truck's headlights illuminated a large sign in the distance. As he drew closer, his heart sank when he saw the words painted in red, "Dead Man's Pass." No, 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 no. Eddie gasped, his breath ragged. He tried to slam on the brakes, but the truck didn't respond. The rig jerked forward, as though being pulled by an invisible force. And the road twisted unnaturally as it curved into a narrow, winding path that led through a dead town. The sky above him shifted colors, becoming an eerie shade of red, and the temperature dropped even more, sending a chill through his bones. The lights of the truck flickered once again. His heart pounded in his chest. Then a voice, a whisper, faint and distant at first, began to call out to him. "Welcome to the road, Eddie." The voice was deep, gutturally, eerily familiar. It echoed in his mind, as though the very earth itself was speaking to him. Eddie's eyes widened, his skin crawling as he looked around, trying to make sense of his surroundings. But there was nothing to see, just darkness and shadow, the road leading to nowhere. Then, ahead of him, something moved, a figure, tall, pale, and walking toward him, one slow step at a time. Eddie's breath hitched, and his stomach lurched. He slammed the brakes, but the truck didn't stop. It was as if the road had taken control. The figure moved closer, and Eddie's eyes went wide in terror as he recognized the twisted, contorted face. It was the driver of the black rig, and now the hunt had begun. Eddie's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his fingers numb, but the truck wouldn't slow down. It just kept going, pulling him forward, relentlessly, like a predator chasing its prey. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his throat. His mouth was dry, his heart hammering against his ribs. The figure continued to approach, its body an unsettling mix of human and something else, something that should not exist in the physical world. Its eyes, hollow and black, bore into Eddie as it drew closer, and the trucker's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to escape, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The truck's headlights flickered again, casting an eerie, ghostly light across the scene, illuminating the surrounding dead vehicles, rusted, decaying trucks that looked like they'd been abandoned long ago. The wind howled, but it wasn't the usual desert breeze. This wind felt like it was alive, pushing against the cab, whispering secrets Eddie wasn't ready to hear. Then, the figure stopped just a few feet from the truck. Eddie's eyes locked onto it. It was wearing a long, tattered jacket, the fabric ripped and frayed as if it had been through decades of wear. The face beneath the hood was obscured by darkness, but Eddie could make out the faintest hint of a grin, sickening, wide and filled with sharp teeth. The truck came to a sudden, jarring stop. Eddie's body lurched forward, his seatbelt pulling tightly across his chest. The figure stepped closer, its movement unnatural, jerking like a marionette on invisible strings. The trucker's breath was shallow now, every part of him screaming to get away. But his body felt paralyzed, as though the very air around him had thickened into something solid. "You're in my domain now," the figure rasped, its voice low and gravelly, like an ancient curse being uttered from the depths of the earth. "The road doesn't let you leave once it has you. Welcome to the endless highway." Eddie's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit him. He was trapped. "Please, no, I'm just passing through," Eddie pleaded, his voice shaky, barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to." The figure chuckled darkly, the sound twisting the air itself, making it feel thick and oppressive. "You don't get to choose, Eddie. Not anymore." The trucker could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as his eyes darted from the figure to the dark, empty road ahead. Panic consumed him. He had heard stories, legends from other drivers, warnings about Highway 71 and the ghosts that haunted it. But he never imagined it could be real. Suddenly, the figure moved again. It was fast, too fast, and with one quick motion, it reached out and gripped the front of Eddie's truck, its long, bony fingers wrapping around the metal like it was nothing more than paper. The rig groaned under the pressure, its engine sputtering, but the truck didn't budge. "I'm just a delivery man," Eddie shouted, trying to reason with the creature. But his words felt hollow in the thick, unnatural air. "I'm just trying to finish this job, please." The figure's grin stretched wider, impossibly wide, showing rows of sharp, jagged teeth that gleamed in the dim light. "That's the problem with all of you," it hissed. "You think you can escape the road, but once you're on it, you're mine." Eddie felt the truck jerk, almost as if it had been yanked from behind. His body slammed back into the seat, and he gasped for air. The road around him seemed to warp and shift, the asphalt beginning to buckle, the horizon pulling inward like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. The shadows lengthened, growing darker, more oppressive, as though the world itself was folding in on him. In the rearview mirror, Eddie saw the black rig, but this time the headlights were not shining from behind him. The rig was there, in front of him now, impossibly large, its grille glowing like an infernal beast's mouth. It stopped directly in his path, blocking the road entirely, and Eddie could feel the heavy presence of the truck's engine rumbling like an approaching storm. His pulse quickened. "Get out of the way," Eddie screamed, banging his fists against the dashboard. "I can't stop." The figure's eyes, black as night, narrowed, watching Eddie's every movement. It raised its hand slowly, a long, crooked finger pointing toward the rig ahead. "It's too late for that now. The road chooses its victims." Eddie's stomach dropped as the black rig's lights grew brighter, blinding him. He swerved to the left, desperate to avoid the oncoming truck. But as soon as he moved, the black rig followed. No matter which direction Eddie tried to take, the truck stayed there, blocking every escape. "Please, I just want to go home." Eddie's voice was desperate, breaking, but it felt as though his words were swallowed by the silence around him. The air grew colder, more suffocating, and Eddie could barely breathe. He could feel someone standing behind him. His neck tingled with the sensation of being watched, and when he dared glance over his shoulder, there was nothing, but he knew. He felt it. The presence was there. With a cry of terror, Eddie slammed his foot down on the gas pedal, pushing the truck to its limit. But the engine sputtered, coughing and groaning in protest. The black rig surged forward, its lights swallowing him whole. Eddie turned the wheel, swerving violently to the side, his truck screeching and rattling as he tried to escape. The desert stretched before him like an endless void, the road bending and twisting in ways that made no sense. But no matter what he did, no matter how far he tried to drive, the rig was always there. Suddenly, the air cracked sharp and loud like thunder, and the world around him snapped into focus. Eddie was no longer on the highway. He was somewhere else, somewhere ancient. The landscape had transformed, and the road that stretched before him now was cracked and overgrown with weeds. The trucks around him all rusted, broken, looked like they hadn't moved in decades. He wasn't alone. Ghostly figures appeared along the sides of the road, some standing, others walking aimlessly, all of them wearing the same hollow, dead-eyed expression. They were truckers' drivers who had disappeared long ago, trapped here in this limbo. "Eddie," a voice whispered from the darkness, soft but unmistakable. "You're one of us now." Eddie's heart froze as the voice grew louder, multiplying, echoing from every corner of his mind. The figure, the one who had been chasing him, was now standing right outside his truck, smiling with that grotesque grin. "You'll never leave," it said, its voice echoing in the still air. Eddie slammed his foot on the brake, but the truck didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. His entire body trembled as he realized there was no escaping this place. There never had been. "You're part of the road now, Eddie," the figure whispered again. "The endless highway claims you forever." And with that, the trucker's cab plunged into darkness, and Eddie Harris became another lost soul on the endless highway, a prisoner in the road's twisted grip. Story 9. The dead driver. The night was eerily quiet, save for the occasional hum of tires rolling over the asphalt. Doug Carter's eyes flicked from the road ahead to the rearview mirror. He had been on this route for years, driving through the winding, isolated roads of Northern California. The truck was a second home to him, and after hours of driving, the cabin had become a familiar cocoon, albeit one where he sometimes struggled to stay alert. But tonight, there was something different. A strange feeling had crept up on Doug. The same unsettling sensation that prickled the back of your neck when you felt like you were being watched. He shrugged it off, chalking it up to exhaustion. He took a deep breath and sipped from his coffee, the bitter warmth helping to push through the fatigue. The road stretched out ahead of him, dark and endless. The trees that lined the highway were dense and wild, their branches swaying gently in the wind. The headlights from his truck illuminated the path in front of him, casting long shadows that made the road feel even more desolate than it already was. A flash of light in his rearview mirror caught his attention. Doug frowned and glanced back at the road, but he saw nothing. He shrugged, but when he looked into the mirror again, there was a truck. The silhouette of a large rig just behind him, almost too close to be comfortable. Doug's eyes widened slightly. The truck wasn't just close, it was too close. Doug had been driving on this stretch for a while, and there was no sign of another vehicle before, so where had it come from? He swerved slightly to the right lane, giving the other truck more space. But the other truck followed. The truck's headlights were bright, almost blindingly so, and Doug could barely make out the details of the vehicle itself. It was large, black, almost ghostly in its ominous presence. For a moment, Doug thought he might have been imagining it. Maybe the exhaustion was finally getting to him. He'd had a long day, after all. But as the black truck stayed right behind him, not budging an inch, something deep in his gut told him that this wasn't just a coincidence. Doug's grip tightened on the steering wheel, and his anxiety began to build. "Come on, man," he muttered to himself. "Get a move on." He pressed down on the accelerator, trying to pull ahead. He glanced in the rearview mirror again. The black truck stayed in position, matching his speed exactly. His heart began to race. Maybe just another driver, Doug tried to reassure himself, but the more he thought about it, the more unsettling it became. If the truck was that close for that long, there was no way it could just be a random coincidence. He needed to shake this truck. Doug floored the gas pedal, his truck accelerating, engine roaring. But when he checked the mirror again, the black rig was right there. This wasn't normal. His thoughts began to race as the wind outside began to howl, rattling the windows. It felt like the whole world had suddenly gone quiet. The only sound was the pounding of his heart in his chest. He checked the road again, then back at the rearview mirror. Eyes wide, the truck had disappeared. The absence was almost worse than seeing the rig behind him. Doug's mind raced, trying to process the sudden change. Where had it gone? Had he imagined it all? Was it some kind of hallucination? Was the loneliness of the open road starting to get to him? He reached for his CB radio and keyed in the mic. Static. A lot of static. Then a voice, but not from anyone Doug recognized. "You're not alone out here, driver." The voice crackled through the static. "He's watching you." Doug's blood ran cold. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as the chilling words echoed in his mind. "Who's watching?" Doug asked aloud, his voice barely a whisper. The static surged again, and then the voice returned, colder, more sinister. "He's been watching you for miles." Doug looked at the rearview mirror, but there was nothing behind him. He checked the side mirrors. Still nothing. His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, trying to keep control of the truck as his mind spun. Maybe it was just a joke, some prank by another driver who had a bad sense of humor. That was possible, right? It was just a radio, after all. But something told him it wasn't a joke. A loud thump echoed from the back of his truck, making Doug flinch in surprise. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror once again. There was the truck, a blur of lights and shadow. This time, it was even closer. He slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on the slick road. He swerved sharply, trying to lose the mysterious rig, but the black truck mirrored his every move. No matter which direction Doug turned, the black truck was right there, matching his every swerve, keeping up with his every turn. Doug's chest tightened as his truck began to feel less like a machine and more like a cage, the road itself becoming an endless stretch of despair. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the black truck vanished again. Doug's hands were shaking now, his breath shallow. His mind raced as the lights of his truck flickered and the engine sputtered. He glanced at the dashboard, but everything seemed to be running fine. Still, something felt wrong, very wrong. He checked the mirror once more. Nothing. Wait, Doug thought. There, it was barely visible in the distance, right at the edge of his headlights. A shadow, the same black rig, barely discernible now, creeping along the side of the road, almost as if it were waiting for him. A wave of nausea hit Doug, and he fought the overwhelming urge to pull over and get out. His instincts screamed at him to turn around and drive in the opposite direction. But the road stretched out before him, its endless curve leading him further into the night. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the black rig's driver's seat. A man, or what looked like a man. But something was off. His skin was pale, almost translucent, his features sharp and angular. His eyes, black as midnight, stared directly at Doug. No expression, no movement, just those eyes, locked onto him with an unblinking intensity. Doug's pulse quickened, and the fear hit him like a tidal wave. He pressed his foot harder onto the gas pedal, but the truck seemed to lose speed. The engine let out a low growl, sputtering again. "No, no, no," Doug muttered. Come on, come on." He slammed the pedal to the floor, but it felt like the truck was pulling away from him, as if the road itself had taken hold of the vehicle. The figure in the truck's seat was still there, now closer, almost right next to him, watching him with that same dead, soulless gaze. "You can't run from the road," the voice came again, but this time, it was right in his ear. Doug whipped around in his seat, but no one was there. The truck behind him was now so close he could see the faint outline of the driver's face in the side mirror. The air inside the cab grew colder, and Doug's breath misted in the air. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his heart pounding like a drum. A voice, the same voice from earlier. "You think you can outrun it, but you can't. It's part of you now." He couldn't take it anymore. Doug's hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His breath came in short, panicked gasps as the mysterious rig continued to match his every move. With one final glance back, he saw the figure again, closer now. The pale face of the driver grinned, the skin of his lips stretching back in a grotesque, unsettling smile. The eyes, those black eyes, were wide open now, and they seemed to shimmer in the reflection of the headlights. And then it happened. The black truck surged forward, its headlights blinding Doug as it closed the gap. With a sickening lurch, it slammed into the back of Doug's rig. The impact sent Doug careening off the road, his truck spinning out of control. The world around him blurred as his truck slid sideways. Doug gripped the wheel, but it was useless. The truck careened off the road, its tires screeching as it plummeted down the slope. Everything was spinning. The air was filled with the sound of metal crunching and glass shattering, and then silence. Doug's vision swam as he tried to regain control of his senses. His truck was overturned, the engine stuttering as it died. He could barely move, his body bruised and aching, his head swimming with dizziness. Through the cracked window, he saw the black rig once again. This time, it was right there, stopped beside him, the figure inside still staring with those dead eyes. Doug couldn't move. He was paralyzed with fear, trapped in his truck, unable to escape. The figure opened the door, its movements stiff and unnatural, and stepped out into the night. "You're mine now," the voice said, cold and final. Doug tried to scream, but no sound came. The figure leaned in close to him, its breath cold against Doug's ear. "The road claims all who drive it." And then the figure reached out, its bony hand gripping Doug's throat. And Doug Carter was gone, swallowed by the road. Story 8. The road to nowhere. Kevin Hale had been driving trucks for years, but he'd never taken a route like this before. He had spent most of his life driving long hauls across the country, from the coast of California to the East Coast, but this stretch of highway felt different. The stretch was vague, nameless and unmarked, remote road deep within the Mojave, desert that had popped up on his GPS. The company had given him new directions after the usual route was flooded, but the company didn't mention anything about it being off the beaten path in any real way. Just another road, another delivery. He could handle it. At first, it was fine. The sky was dark, the road lit only by the headlights of his rig and the occasional flicker of distant stars. The rumble of his truck was the only sound that broke the silence. Kevin took a sip from his thermos, settled into his seat, and pushed onward. He was used to isolation, used to long stretches of empty roads. Driving alone wasn't new to him, but the longer he drove, the more unsettled he became. It wasn't anything he could put his finger on, but the air felt off. The kind of unease you feel when you know something's wrong, but you can't quite explain why. His truck's headlights flickered for a split second, the darkness swallowing the road ahead. But Kevin didn't think much of it. That is, until the road began to change. Kevin had been on the same stretch for hours, driving deeper into the desert as the temperature dropped. The dry heat during the day had given way to a bitter, bone-chilling cold. His hands gripped the wheel tighter, the only light in the cab coming from the dashboard and his headlights. He glanced at the GPS. It showed no landmarks for miles ahead. No signposts. No exits. Just ... road. Kevin clicked the radio on, the static filling the air. He tuned the dial, hoping to hear anything that could break the silence, but only more static answered. "Come on," Kevin muttered to himself. "Where's the next turnoff?" He clicked the turn signal, expecting to find an exit, a rest stop, anything, but there was nothing. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the same dull asphalt, no curves, no landmarks, no signs to indicate where he was. It was like the road was swallowing everything in its path, erasing any trace of time or distance. As his truck rumbled forward, the fog began to roll in. Not normal fog either. This was thick, unnatural, moving in a way that made no sense. Kevin slowed the truck down, squinting through the thickening haze. His breath quickened as the world outside the truck became swallowed by the white, suffocating mist. His headlights cast an eerie glow against the vapor, but even that was swallowed. Up in seconds, he glanced at his GPS again. The screen flickered. No signal. He tapped the screen in frustration. "Come on." You piece of the truck jolted. The sudden movement sent Kevin's hand jerking down onto the steering wheel, nearly losing control for a moment. He could feel the truck tremble beneath him as the wheels hummed against the road. It wasn't a pothole, not a sudden gust of wind. It was as if the road had shifted, as if something below it was moving. A flash of light broke through the fog, and Kevin snapped his head up, squinting ahead. The fog thickened even more, but there was a faint shape, something looming in the distance. Kevin's heart raced, wondering if it was an abandoned vehicle or some kind of structure. He drove closer, the silhouette taking shape. It was a sign, though the letters were too blurred by the fog to read. As Kevin approached it, his truck started to slow down without him pressing the brakes. The engine groaned as if fighting against him. A cold shiver ran down Kevin's spine. He slammed his foot on the gas, trying to speed through the fog, but the truck barely moved. He looked ahead again. The sign loomed larger in front of him. His lights illuminated it fully now, and he could see the words, "Dead Man's Road." Kevin felt his pulse race. His heart thudded in his chest, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. This had to be a prank. There was no way that sin was real. It had to be some kind of joke, right? He had to be imagining things. He turned the wheel sharply, wanting to get away from the sign. But no matter what he did, no matter how far he drove, the road wouldn't bend. It felt like he was driving in a straight line, but somehow he was trapped. The fog thickened, and the sign, "Dead Man's Road," remained in his headlights, like it had always been there. The truck began to slow again. The wheels didn't respond as they should. The truck sputtered, and Kevin cursed under his breath, slamming the accelerator. "Come on," he yelled. "Get me out of here." But the road stretched on, and the sign didn't fade away. The truck rolled to a stop. Kevin turned the key and tried to restart the engine, but it was no use. It was dead. His stomach turned as he looked out through the windshield. Desperate for a sign of life, anything to confirm that this was just some weird glitch in the Matrix. But there was nothing. Just the thick fog and the oppressive silence. A voice crackled through his CB radio. "You shouldn't be here." Kevin froze. His body went cold at the sound of the voice, deep and gravely. It sounded ancient, as if it came from somewhere far older than the road itself. "Who's there?" Kevin asked, his voice shaking. "You're lost, driver." The voice seemed to reverberate inside his skull. It wasn't coming through the radio speakers. It was coming from the air around him. A cold wind blew through the cab, sending chills down his spine. Kevin turned to look through the truck's side mirror. A shape moved in the fog behind him, a shadow that didn't belong to anything tangible. He spun back to the wheel, gripped the steering column, and stared into the fog ahead of him. The mist seemed to pulse with a life of its own, swirling and twisting as if something was moving within it. Kevin blinked rapidly, trying to clear his mind. But when he looked back at the sign, it had changed. It now read, "Turn back, panic." surged in Kevin's chest. His truck wouldn't start. The fog was closing in, and now the road itself seemed to be warning him. He yanked the door handle, scrambling out of the truck. But as soon as his boots hit the ground, the world around him shifted again. The road stretched endlessly before him, but it looked different now. The desert had disappeared, and the landscape was now ... wrong. The sand had turned into cracked asphalt that seemed to stretch for miles. There were broken down vehicles, rusted and decayed, lining the side of the road, abandoned long ago. There, metal frames twisted, their windows shattered. The air felt thick with the scent of decay. Kevin stumbled backward in shock. There were no trees, no hills, just endless, crumbling road. And that's when he noticed it. A figure in the distance. It was standing at the edge of the road. Watching him, Kevin's breath caught in his throat. The figure was tall and draped in a long, tattered coat. Its face was obscured by shadow, but there was something about the way it moved that sent waves of terror through his body. It didn't walk, it floated toward him, like it was hovering just above the ground. Kevin took a step back, instinctively reaching for his truck, but he couldn't move. His body felt heavy, like the air itself was holding him down. The figure didn't stop. It kept moving toward him, its steps slow and deliberate. "You shouldn't have come." The voice echoed through Kevin's mind again. Kevin's eyes flicked to the side, and the fog had closed in around him, obscuring everything else. The road had become nothing more than a maze, a dead end that stretched on forever. He couldn't escape. The figure stopped in front of him, and Kevin froze, his legs unable to move, his body numb with terror. "You are part of it now," the figure whispered. A heavy silence fell over the road. Kevin's chest tightened. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the truck, toward the road behind him. "Drive, if you can," the figure murmured. "But you will never leave." The fog grew heavier, wrapping itself around Kevin like a suffocating blanket. His heart raced in his chest as the figure slowly faded into the mist, leaving only its chilling words behind. Kevin stumbled back toward the truck, desperate to leave, but the engine refused to start. His hands were shaking now as he turned the key again and again. Nothing. And then, as if it had been waiting for him, the voice returned, faint, distant, but unmistakable. "You can't leave. Not from here. Not ever again." The sound of the road stretched out before him, silent, eternal. And then it hit him, the truth. There was no leaving this road, and in the distance, the headlights of another truck appeared. It was behind him, closer this time, and the driver was watching him, always waiting him, always waiting. Kevin was part of the road now, a lost driver, a ghost, and the road would never let him leave. Story 7. The watcher in the rear view. The night was unusually quiet, save for the faint hum of the tires against the empty asphalt. Paul Matthews, a seasoned trucker, had been on the road for nearly 20 hours straight, the endless miles of California's highways blurring together in a haze of exhaustion. The glow of his headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating only a narrow strip of road ahead. The truck's interior was a familiar cocoon of solitude, but tonight, the isolation felt more suffocating than usual. He had taken the last few hours of his shift without stopping, no rest breaks, no gas stations, just him, his truck, and the silent stretch of road cutting through the vast, empty desert. It was just past 2 a.m., and the world around him was swallowed by a heavy, eerie quiet. He'd heard the tales from other drivers' stories about strange occurrences on these long, desert routes, about things that couldn't be explained. Paul wasn't one to believe in ghost stories or urban legends, but something was nagging at the back of his mind, a growing feeling that something wasn't right tonight. He couldn't put his finger on it. It started as a vague sense of uneasy whisper at the edge of his consciousness. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror for the third time, his heart skipped a beat. There was something behind him at first. It was nothing more than a vague shape, too far behind to be anything threatening. But it was there, moving in his blind spot, always just at the edge of his perception. He blinked and focused, trying to clear his tired eyes. And there it was, again a vehicle. It was large, dark, its headlights glowing like twin eyes in the distance. But the strange thing was, it hadn't been there when Paul had checked earlier. He would have noticed. The road behind him had been empty, no cars, no trucks, just a long, empty stretch of highway. The truck in his mirror wasn't a car or a typical Rigget. Looked like something was off about it. The headlights were too bright, too unnatural, and the body of the truck was shrouded in shadows, impossible to make out fully. It looked like it was closing the distance at an alarming speed. Paul's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. As his eyes flicked back and forth between the road ahead and the mirror, there was no mistaking it now. The truck was getting closer. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He increased speed, pushing the rig faster, trying to put some distance between himself and the mysterious vehicle. But the faster he drove, the closer the truck seemed to get. No matter what, it stayed right behind him. It's just a trick of the mind, Paul muttered to himself, trying to shake the fear creeping into his chest. Maybe I'm just too tired. But that didn't explain the way the truck seemed to mimic his every movement when Paul swerved. The headlights in his rearview mirror swerved with him. When he accelerated, the other truck did the same. The distance between them never changed. It was as if the vehicle was always just behind him, shadowing his every move. His anxiety began to spiral as he focused harder on the mirror. The more he stared, the more his mind began to conjure images of things that shouldn't have been there. His reflection seemed wrong, distorted, slightly warped. The fog on the glass of the mirror thickened, and for a split second, the reflection of the road behind him vanished entirely, replaced by something else. Something darker. He blinked, his pulse quickening. The distortion faded, but the sense of being watched, hunted remained. Paul wasn't the kind of man to lose his head, but his nerves were fraying, and he felt an oppressive weight in the air around him, like something was pulling at the edges of reality itself. The road was empty, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something was waiting. Another glance at the rear view mirror confirmed his worst fear. The truck was still there, closer. His heart hammered in his chest. Panic crept up his throat like a knot, suffocating him. He slammed his foot on the gas, pushing the truck to its limit. The engine roared in response, and the wind howled through the open vents. He could feel the vehicle surging forward, but the truck behind him kept pace. What the hell is going on? The road began to twist and turn, the headlights of the other truck illuminating the sharp bends in the road. Paul's mind was spinning, his heart pounding harder with every passing second. He glanced into the mirror once more. The truck wasn't just following him now. It was mirroring him. Every movement he made, every swerve of the wheel it matched, like it was anticipating his every move. That's not possible, Paul thought. It's not possible. And then it happened. A dark shape flickered in the mirror. The figure of a man standing in the bed of the truck. A figure cloaked in shadows, but with eyes that gleamed bright and unnatural. Paul's breath caught in his throat. The figure was watching him, locked in place. Its gaze trained on him with terrifying intensity. Paul's vision blurred, the world outside the cab swirling as his thoughts raced. He couldn't look away from the mirror, couldn't pull himself from that terrible, predatory gaze. Without warning, the figure in the truck raised its hand. The gesture was slow, deliberate. And then, in the stillness of the night, the world around Paul seemed to shift. The road began to bend in impossible ways. Paul slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the truck swerved. But it felt like the ground itself was shifting under him. The asphalt rippled, warping around the tires, and Paul was no longer sure which direction he was headed. The headlights of the truck in his mirror grew impossibly large, as if they were about to swallow him whole, and then the lights flickered. For a moment, the world went black. When the lights returned, Paul's heart nearly stopped. The road had changed. The familiar stretch of desert highway had vanished, replaced by an unrecognizable landscape. The asphalt was cracked, the paint on the road faded and chipped. There were no signs, no landmarks, just endless, twisting roads that led nowhere. And the truck, it was gone. No sign of it anywhere. Paul's mind raced. His eyes darted across the landscape, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He was alone now, but the lingering sensation that something or someone was still watching him never left. He glanced at the GPS. The screen flickered, but it showed no route, no destination. It just blinked in silence. How long have I been driving? He checked the clock. It was the same time it had been hours ago, but it felt like the night had stretched on forever. Time had stopped. The road had stopped. And the truck, it wasn't gone. It was just waiting. Waiting for him to make the wrong turn. The fog returned, thicker than ever. The temperature inside the cab dropped sharply. Paul's breath fogged up the window, and the eerie silence enveloped him. He had to keep moving, had to keep driving. But now, with each passing mile, the road seemed to get darker, more distorted. And then, in the corner of his eye, he saw it again, the truck, but it wasn't in the rearview mirror this time. No, this time it was directly ahead, just barely visible through the fog. It was parked, waiting at an intersection that shouldn't have existed. Its headlights dimmed, casting strange shadows over the road. The figure stood in the bed of the truck again, its eyes glowing in the darkness. And this time, it wasn't just watching it, was waiting for him to stop. No, thought Paul's single quotes as foot slammed down on the gas. But the truck didn't respond. He was trapped. The fog grew denser, swallowing his truck, his vision, the road. The world outside the cab turned black, as though it had been erased from existence. There was nothing but the truck ahead, and the glowing eyes of the figure. "You've been following me for hours, haven't you?" Paul whispered hoarsely, his voice shaking with terror. The figure in the bed of the truck didn't respond, but in the stillness, Paul heard a voice, not from the truck, but from inside his head. "You can never escape. Not from the road. Not from me." The truck's headlights flared, the light engulfing Paul, blinding him. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly he thought he might break it. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the very weight of the world was pressing down on him. And in the distance, beyond the headlights, Paul saw something that sent a spike of cold dread through his body. There was another truck, dark, looming and moving in his direction. The road stretched on endlessly, a loop he couldn't break. He had become part of it, part of the endless highway. and now it was his turn to follow. Story 6. The desert voice. Dean Holloway was used to the desert. After years of hauling freight across the western United States, he knew the Mojave like the back of his hand. Long stretches of highway, the sun beating down relentlessly during the day, the cold wind sweeping in after dark. He had seen it all. Yet tonight, something felt different. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, like the entire desert was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He had picked up the late-night shift after another driver had called in sick. The route was the same as always, just another job, another set of miles to eat up. Dean wasn't a man of many words. The hum of his truck's engine and the occasional crackle of his CB radio were all he needed to stay awake. The miles passed by one after another as his eyes scanned the road ahead. The sun had set hours ago, and the moon hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the barren desert floor. Dean had been on the road for hours now, the weight of exhaustion starting to settle in. He'd been through this stretch so many times, he could drive it with his eyes closed, but tonight, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. It started as a faint noise, so soft that he almost thought it was his imagination playing tricks on him. A whisper at first. He thought it was just the wind rustling through the cracks in the truck's frame. But the more he listened, the clearer it became. It was a voice, a low, guttural murmur, as if someone was speaking just outside his window. Dean frowned, shaking his head. Probably just the wind, he muttered to himself. But the whispers didn't stop. In fact, they grew louder, as if the voice was coming from somewhere closer, right behind him. His hand gripped the wheel tighter as he flicked the radio dial, hoping for a distraction. The static crackled and then turned back. Dean, the voice, it was clear now. Clear enough to make him freeze in his seat. His breath caught in his throat. "Who the hell is that?" Dean muttered, looking over his shoulder. There was no one in the cab but him. The truck was empty except for his reflection in the side mirror. He took a deep breath and tried to shake off the sudden unease, glancing at the road ahead. The highway stretched out in front of him, a ribbon of light cutting through the darkness. There was nothing but the occasional rock formation or scattered cactus on either side of the road. He was alone out here, far from the nearest town. "Just focus on the road, Dean. It's nothing. Just your mind playing tricks." He kept driving, but the voice came again, louder this time. "Turn back, or you'll never leave." Dean's heart raced. His hands were slick with sweat as he gripped the wheel harder. There was no one on the radio, no one out here. Yet the voice was unmistakable, as if it was coming from the very air itself, vibrating through the metal of his truck. "Who the hell are you?" Dean shouted into the empty cab, his voice strained with fear. The voice responded, its tone dark and ominous. "I am the one who calls, the one who waits. The road will take you if you don't turn around." The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, as if trying to shake the voice out of his head. "This isn't happening," he muttered, staring ahead at the endless road. "It's just the fatigue. I need to get off this highway." But the voice didn't stop. "You are already lost. The road has claimed you." Dean's pulse quickened, sweat beaded on his forehead. He wasn't imagining this. Someone or something was speaking to him, and the words, they felt wrong, like they weren't meant for him, but for something far worse. His eyes darted between the rearview mirror and the road ahead, searching for something, anything. But there was only the faint glow of his headlights, cutting through the night. illuminating the endless stretch of asphalt. The voice came again, almost a whisper in the back of his mind, its words curling through his thoughts like a slow poison. You cannot leave. It is too late. Turn back. Dean gritted his teeth. No. His voice was hoarse, but he refused to believe it. He wasn't some character in a ghost story. He was a trucker, a man who had driven through worse conditions than this. He had seen everything from dust storms to washed out roads, but this was something different, something he couldn't explain. His truck shuddered, the engine sputtering for a split second before it roared back to life. The headlights flickered, casting long, grotesque shadows across the road. Dean's grip on the wheel tightened as he glanced at the dashboard, only to notice the fuel gauge was dropping rapidly. He was miles away from the nearest station, and there was no way the truck should be low on fuel this soon. The voice spoke again, but this time, it was different. It was a distorted, sickly tone, like something trying to tear its way out of the truck itself. You should have turned back, ... Double quotes. A cold, damp sensation crawled up Dean's spine. He glanced at the rearview mirror again. This time, there was something there. Something new. A dark, distorted shape had appeared behind him, faint at first, but then it grew clearer with every second. It was a figure, a shadowy silhouette that didn't belong on the road. It was tall, far too tall to be a person, and its outline was blurred, like it was made of smoke, twisting and shifting as it approached. Dean's breath caught in his throat as the figure grew closer. His mind screamed for him to floor the gas pedal and get away, but his body refused to cooperate. It was as if his very being had frozen, rooted to the spot. The voice, now clearer than ever, came again. I warned you, Dean. You should have listened. His hands shook as he gripped the wheel tighter, forcing himself to look away from the mirror. But the figure was still there, its presence growing stronger with each passing second. The temperature inside the cab dropped, and the air became thick and suffocating. Suddenly, the truck jerked violently, throwing Dean against the door. He slammed the brakes instinctively, but it felt like the truck was being pulled forward by some unseen force. The engine sputtered again, and this time, it didn't start back up. What the hell is going on? Dean muttered, his voice trembling. The headlights flickered one last time before they went out entirely, plunging him into complete darkness. The truck's engine was silent now, and all that remained was the sound of his ragged breathing and the overwhelming sense of something closing in on him. The figure in the rearview mirror was no longer there, but the presence lingered, heavy in the air, pressing down on him. In the distance, there was a faint light. Dean strained his eyes, trying to make sense of it, but the light didn't seem to grow any closer, no matter how fast he drove. The desert around him stretched endlessly, an endless void of nothingness. The voice returned, softer now, like it was coming from the very air itself. The road takes what it wants, Dean, and you are mine now. Panic flooded through him. He twisted the key in the ignition again and again, but the truck wouldn't start. The empty desert stretched out before him, silent and still, as if the entire world had stopped moving. The light in the distance flickered, but it didn't grow any brighter, and then a sound, a soft thud, the sound of footsteps. Dean's eyes darted around, but there was no one there. Just the endless stretch of road, the broken truck, and the oppressive silence. A figure appeared in the fog ahead, just like the one he had seen in the rearview mirror. It was walking slowly toward him, its face obscured by the dark mist that surrounded it. Dean's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. He knew what was coming. He had been warned, but it was too late. There was nowhere to run. The figure stopped right in front of his truck, and the voice echoed through his mind once more. "You belong to the road now." And just like that, the light in the distance flickered and vanished, leaving only the darkness, the endless desert, and the unrelenting weight of the road. Dean Holloway was never seen again. Story 5. The black-eyed trucker Jack Davis had been driving trucks for over 10 years, hauling freight up and down the West Coast. He was used to long, lonely nights on the road, but tonight something felt different. The desert stretched on in every direction, endless and barren, the dark sky above filled with distant stars. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the pavement was the only sound that kept him company. As the miles passed one after another in the lonely stretch of Highway 95, his destination was still hours away, and he couldn't shake the sense that he was being pulled into something that wasn't quite right. Jack had been driving all day and was about to pull into a small, run-down truck stop to refuel. He needed a break. His eyes felt heavy, and the exhaustion from being on the road for so long was catching up to him. The headlights illuminated the sparse surroundings, casting eerie shadows on the cracked asphalt. The dim lights of the truck stop were barely visible in the distance, a solitary oasis in the desert's vastness as he neared the truck stop. Jack noticed a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a young man, probably in his mid, wearing a dirty leather jacket and holding his thumb out, as if he was waiting for a ride. Great, a hitchhiker, Jack thought, as he slowed down, wondering if he should stop. He hadn't picked up a hitchhiker in years, too many strange stories, too many warnings, but the man seemed harmless enough. And besides, it wasn't like Jack could leave him out here in the middle of nowhere. He pulled up to the side of the road, rolling down his window. The man looked up, his face pale, eyes wide, his hair unkempt and wild. He had the kind of look that screamed trouble, but Jack figured there was no harm in offering him a lift. "You need a ride?" Jack called out, trying to sound casual. The man's lips twitched, and he took a step forward, nodding silently. Jack unlocked the door, and the hitchhiker climbed into the passenger seat. The man smelled faintly of sweat and old cigarettes, but Jack didn't say anything. He figured they'd be on their way quickly enough, and then he could get some rest at the truck stop. "Where you headed?" Jack asked, trying to make small talk to ease the tension. The silence between them was uncomfortable. The man didn't immediately respond. He just stared ahead, his face expressionless. Jack glanced over at him, but the man's gaze was fixed straight ahead, like he was lost in thought. "You all right?" Jack asked, raising an eyebrow. "Long trip ahead, huh?" The man's lips barely parted as he whispered, "I just need to get out of here." The chill in his voice caught Jack off guard. There was something unsettling about him, something off, like the man wasn't fully there. But Jack brushed it off. He was probably just tired, too. It was a long, lonely road, and a lot of drivers got weird after a while. He had nothing to fear. "I hear you," Jack said, his voice warm. "The desert can get to a person after a while. We'll be at the next truck stop in no time." The hitchhiker's eyes flicked toward him for the first time since he'd climbed in. Jack froze, a strange prickling sensation crawling up the back of his neck. The man's eyes, black as coal, devoid of any color or light, stared back at him, cold and hollow. There was nothing in them, no humanity, no emotion, just a void. Jack's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was imagining things. He looked away quickly, his pulse racing, and focused on the road ahead. But something felt wrong now. He couldn't shake the feeling that the man was staring at him, even when his eyes were focused on the highway. "Hey, Jack said, trying to sound casual but feeling his throat dry up. "You okay? You look like you've seen better days." The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, weathered map. He unfolded it slowly, still staring straight ahead, as though Jack wasn't even there. Jack glanced at the map, noting that it was stained and torn, but the hitchhiker held it with a certain reverence, tracing a finger over the route in silence. "What's that?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man finally spoke again, his voice low and measured. "This is where it started, where it all began. The road, the endless road." He turned his head slightly to meet Jack's eyes, his lips curling into a faint, unsettling smile. "The road never ends. It just takes you." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The hairs on his arms stood up, but he didn't know why. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow, fake. "You sure about that? You're not making much sense, man." The hitchhiker's smile faded, and his gaze shifted back to the map, his expression blank. "It never ends. It never lets you go." The words hung in the air, heavy and chilling. Jack's hands gripped the wheel tighter, but the sensation of unease continued to build. He glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, he saw something. The reflection was wrong, distorted. A shadow seemed to flicker in the mirror, just behind the truck, like something moving that shouldn't be there. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. "Hey, you okay back there?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice calm. The hitchhiker didn't respond. Jack turned his attention back to the road, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror again. But this time, there was nothing, just the empty road behind him. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of confusion creeping into his mind. The hitchhiker's voice came again, breaking the silence like a whisper on the wind. "It's too late, Jack. You can't outrun it." Jack's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his breath quickened. He wasn't sure if the hitchhiker was messing with him, or if there was something wrong with him, something dark, something twisted. He wanted to tell the man to get out of the truck, but the words wouldn't come. It was like the air in the cab had turned to ice, thick and suffocating. "Listen, buddy, I don't know what you're talking about, but you're scaring me, okay?" Jack said, his voice shaking slightly despite his attempts to stay calm. The hitchhiker's gaze remained locked on him, those black eyes empty and endless. "The road takes what it wants, Jack." Something inside Jack snapped. His foot slammed down on the accelerator, and the truck surged forward, pushing the speedometer past 75 miles per hour. He was done. Whatever game this guy was playing, Jack wasn't sticking around to find out the end of it. But as the truck picked up speed, the hitchhiker's expression didn't change. His eyes remained fixed on Jack, and his lips curled into a smile that sent a jolt of terror through Jack's chest. "It's too late to escape. You're already part of it." Jack's mind raced, the words echoing in his ears. His heart was pounding as he glanced in the rearview mirror again, and then it hit him. The truck behind him, it had never been there before. It wasn't just following him, it was stalking him. It was large, dark, its headlights glowing like burning coals in the night. And it was getting closer. Fast, Jack slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching in protest as he swerved violently to the side of the road, nearly losing control of the wheel. He looked back at the passenger seat. The hitchhiker was gone, vanished. His seat was empty. "It's time, Jack." Jack jerked his head back to the road, eyes wide in terror. The black truck was right behind him now, its headlights blinding. He could feel the presence of it, feel its weight pressing against him, suffocating him. The truck swerved, clipping the side of Jack's rig. He screamed, trying to fight for control of the wheel, but the road seemed to twist around him, the landscape distorting, pulling him into the blackness. The black-eyed trucker's voice came again, softer now, almost a whisper. "The road always claims those who drive it too long." And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the truck was gone. The road stretched ahead, empty once more. The air was thick with silence, and Jack's heart raced in his chest, pounding with fear. The headlights of his truck flickered as he fought to catch his breath, and in the rearview mirror, he saw nothing but his own reflection. The dark road behind him was empty, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was wrong. Something had changed. Something had followed him, something that wasn't human, and Jack knew, deep down, that he wasn't alone. Story 4. The Midnight Driver was a typical night for Kyle Richardson, another long haul through California's endless highways. The engine of his rig hummed steadily as he cruised down Interstate 10, the tires spinning over the dark road that stretched endlessly beneath him. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale light over the barren landscape, and the faint rustle of wind through the cracked windows was the only sound accompanying him on his journey. Kyle had been driving for over 20 years. The open road had become his second home, and the isolation of long, nighttime drives didn't bother him. He had grown accustomed to it. Most truckers did. The solitude gave him time to think, time to reflect on life and everything that had brought him to this point. The highway was his escape. He didn't need much, just his truck, his CB radio, and the quiet rhythm of the road. But tonight was different. It wasn't the highway that felt wrong. It wasn't the emptiness of the desert around him, nor the isolation of the route. It was the strange feeling that had settled in the pit of his stomach, something Kyle couldn't quite shake, something he couldn't explain. At first, it was just a nagging sensation, the kind you get when you think someone's watching you. But as the night dragged on, it only got worse. Kyle glanced into his side mirror. The highway behind him was dark, the only visible lights coming from his truck's taillights. No other vehicles for miles. He took a breath, shaking his head. "Get a grip, Kyle," he thought to himself. He was imagining things. After all, he'd driven these roads 1,000 times, and it was always quiet out here. But then, just a few minutes later, he saw it again. A pair of headlights. Kyle squinted into the mirror, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't seen another truck or car in hours. The road had been empty, and yet now there was a vehicle behind him, a dark shape, moving closer. At first, he assumed it was just another trucker, maybe someone else making a late-night delivery. But when he checked again, the truck was closer, almost too close. The headlights seemed to flicker slightly, casting a strange, almost unnatural glow on the road ahead. Kyle felt a slight chill run down his spine. He didn't know why, but he felt a sense of urgency and need to get away from this truck. It wasn't just that it was behind him. It was how it was behind him. The way it stayed so close, tailing him with precision, without ever seeming to get any closer. Kyle's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He sped up, pushing his truck to 75 miles per hour, but the other vehicle didn't falter. It matched his speed perfectly. A bead of sweat formed on Kyle's forehead despite the cool desert air. He checked his mirrors again. The truck was right there, still too close for comfort. Something wasn't right. The headlights were blinding now, too bright, too aggressive, damn it. Kyle muttered under his breath. He tapped his horn, a short, sharp blast of sound meant to signal the other driver to back off. But the truck didn't change its position. It just stayed there, locked in step with him. Kyle's mind raced. He glanced at his GPS. Nothing but desert. No exits, no turn-offs for miles. Just a straight shot of highway that seemed to stretch on forever. He swerved slightly to the right lane, hoping to give the other truck more space, but it mirrored his movement, moving into the same lane. Kyle cursed under his breath. He pressed the gas pedal down harder, feeling the truck's engine roar to life as he tried to speed up. But the other truck didn't fall back. It stayed on his tail. "Hey buddy," Kyle said aloud, his voice trembling slightly as his eyes darted back to the rearview mirror. "What the hell is your problem?" The truck's headlights gleamed brighter, almost blinding now. It was like the other driver was trying to push him, force him to speed. Kyle's heart pounded faster, his breaths coming in shallow bursts. His eyes flicked between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, but there was no change. The truck was still there, closing the gap, moving with an eerie, methodical precision. He had to shake it off, had to get away. He floored the gas pedal, pushing the truck harder, but the other vehicle didn't budge. In fact, it got closer. Kyle slammed on the brakes, the rig skidding for a moment. But when he looked in the rearview mirror again, the truck was right there, no more than a few feet from his rear bumper. His breath caught in his throat as he jerked the wheel to the left, barely managing to keep the truck on the road. The other truck followed, matching his every move. Kyle's panic spiked. He was losing control. "What the hell do you want from me?" Kyle shouted at the empty road, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. Suddenly, the other truck swerved around him, passing by so close that he could feel the wind from it, almost as if the truck was deliberately pushing him out of the way. The headlights glared into his eyes, blinding him for a moment. He couldn't see the truck's shape, just the brilliant, almost too bright lights cutting through the desert. And then, the truck was gone. For a moment, Kyle could only blink, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. His heart was pounding in his chest, his hands slick with sweat. The desert around him seemed too quiet, too still. But there it was again. In the distance, a faint set of headlights. Kyle couldn't breathe. He stared at the glowing lights, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. They were behind him again, closing in. It was like it had been waiting, watching, and now it was ready to strike. His mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? Was someone trying to mess with him? A sick joke by another trucker? No, this was different. Something wasn't right. The headlights flickered. For a split second, they disappeared, and Kyle's stomach dropped as the truck seemed to vanish. What is happening? Kyle's breathing was shallow now. He checked his mirrors, empty. No headlights, no truck in sight. Just the faint glow of his own rig's taillights cutting through the vast emptiness. He glanced down at his phone. No signal. Great, he muttered. Out here in the middle of nowhere, and no one's around. But then he heard it, the sound of tires on the road, growing louder by the second. His eyes snapped up to the rearview mirror again, and there it was. The truck. But it wasn't in the distance anymore. It was right behind him again, and it was closer, now so close that he could make out the details of the grille. But something was different about the truck. Something was wrong. It wasn't just that it was an ordinary truck. It wasn't the shape, the color, or even the lights. It was something about the way the headlights shone. They didn't have that warm yellow glow. They were white, piercing, like cold, lifeless eyes staring at him. The truck pulled up beside him now, moving at the same speed. The driver's side window was rolled down, and for a moment, Kyle swore he saw a shadowy figure inside. Someone was watching him. Who the hell is this? Kyle's hand trembled as he reached for the CB radio. His fingers brushed against the mic, but before he could speak, the truck swerved into his lane, forcing him to slam on the brakes. "God damn it," Kyle shouted, his voice thick with panic. His eyes darted between the road and the mirror, trying to keep control of his truck as he swerved to avoid a collision. But the truck was still right there, side by side, almost pushing him forward. The figure inside the truck was still staring at him, and now it was smiling. The grin was widened, naturally wide, too wide for a human to make. Kyle's heart thundered in his chest. His breath was ragged now, his vision swimming. Something was wrong. Something was wrong with the driver, with the truck, with everything. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The only thing he could do was drive. Faster, faster. The truck sped up, closing the distance between them, as if it was trying to overtake him, to pull him in. It came so close, Kyle could see the figure's eyes clearly in the mirror. The eyes were black, completely black. No pupils, no whites. Just two pits of darkness staring at him. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the truck swerved. Off the road, the tires screeched as the vehicle spun, vanishing into the darkness of the desert. For a moment, Kyle couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He slammed his foot on the brakes, and the truck finally came to a screeching halt. His heart was pounding in his chest as he stared into the rearview mirror. The truck was gone. The road was empty, but Kyle could still feel its presence, like it was lurking just out of sight, waiting for him to slip up, to make a mistake. It's not over, Kyle thought. It's never over. Story 3. The radio static hit was just another night on the road for Jack Carter. Another empty stretch of highway through the middle of nowhere. The headlights of his rig sliced through the darkness. The rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt, a familiar lullaby as he sped down the highway. The desert sprawled endlessly around him, the vastness broken only by the occasional mountain silhouette and the faint glow of his truck's dashboard. Jack had been driving for hours, the night slipping by like a dream. His destination was still hours away, but he didn't mind the solitude. The loneliness of the road had become a second home, and the CB radio was his only companion. An occasional voice from the other drivers out there in the wilderness. "Breaker, breaker, this is Big Rig 42. Anyone out there?" He called into the mic. The voice on the other end was faint, just enough to cut through the silence. "Big Rig 42, this is Blue Streak. I hear you loud and clear. You doing okay out there?" Jack grinned, grateful for the friendly interruption. "Yeah, just another night. Long haul ahead. How about you?" "Same here, just trying to make it through this stretch without falling asleep. Keep an eye out for the fog that rolls in out here. It's creeping up on us fast." Jack adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, scanning the road ahead. The fog was a common occurrence out here, especially this time of year. It would come in fast, thick and blinding, making the roads treacherous for truckers like him. "Thanks for the heads up, Blue Streak. I'll keep my eyes peeled," Jack replied. "Stay safe out there." "Roger that, Big Rig 42. See you on the flip side." The conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun, the static of the radio returning to fill the cabin with white noise. Jack's eyes wandered to the dashboard, checking his speed, his fuel gauge, the familiar lights and dials. Everything was normal, everything was routine. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was used to the solitude, but the occasional conversation on the CB radio was a welcome distraction. A few minutes later, the static broke again, but this time it wasn't the friendly chatter of another trucker. "Jack, do you remember what you did?" A low, distorted voice whispered through the static. Jack's fingers froze on the gear shift. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he thought the radio was malfunctioning. He glanced at the display, but it was working perfectly fine. "What the hell?" he muttered to himself. The voice came again, this time clearer, more deliberate. "Jack, do you remember what you did?" Jack felt a chill slide down his spine. He glanced at the radio, then back at the road ahead. His grip on the wheel tightened. This wasn't just interference. This was real. The voice was too clear, too distinct. "Who the hell is this?" Jack said, his voice trembling slightly. But there was no answer, only the faint crackling of static. Jack leaned closer to the radio, his eyes scanning the road as he drove, the tension rising in his chest. "Who's out there?" he demanded, his heart racing. "What do you want?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Jack's breath fogged up the window as he exhaled, trying to steady himself. Then, the voice returned this time, even clearer. "Do you remember the girl, Jack? The one in the red dress?" Jack's stomach twisted. His hands gripped the wheel harder as his mind raced back, far back to when he was a young man, just starting out as a trucker. The girl in the red dress. It had been a mistake, one he had buried deep in his memory, a mistake that had haunted him ever since. He could almost see her in his mind's eye, her long brown hair, the way she had smiled when she got into his truck, the way he had ignored the warning signs. He remembered how she had disappeared from his life just as quickly as she had entered it. It was a brief encounter, just a moment in time. Or so he thought. He never thought it would come back to haunt him. "Who is this?" Jack asked, his voice low, now trembling. "What do you want from me?" The voice on the radio paused, and then it responded, its tone now colder, almost malicious. "Do you remember what you did, Jack? You let her in, you let her in." Jack's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles turned white. He swallowed hard, but his throat felt dry, like sandpaper. He couldn't breathe. His mind raced, trying to remember, trying to understand. The memory the girl in the red dress had been tucked away for so long. But now it was surfacing again, forcing him to confront something he had long buried. He glanced at the rearview mirror, the dark highway stretching out behind him. His headlights illuminated the empty road, but something felt off. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was following him. He reached for the CB again, his fingers trembling. "I don't know who this is, but you better stop messing with me," Jack said, his voice shaking. "This isn't funny. I don't remember what you're talking about." The voice came again, softer now, but filled with venom. "You remember, Jack. You know what you did. You're not going to escape it. Not this time." The hairs on the back of Jack's neck stood up. He glanced nervously at the road behind him again. The truck was still alone on the highway, but the oppressive, suffocating feeling was growing stronger. He was no longer alone. He tried to push the thoughts out of his mind. He had work to do. The road was his, and it was the only thing that had kept him sane over the years. The endless highway was where he belonged, But now, that voice, those words had shaken something inside him. The road was no longer just a place to drive. It was something else. Something that was pulling him in, dragging him toward. Something he wasn't sure he could escape. He pressed his foot harder on the accelerator, the engine roaring to life as he sped up, trying to push the unease out of his mind. But then radio crackled again. "Jack, do you remember the accident? The girl in the red dress?" Jack's blood ran cold, his vision blurred. The accident. The one he'd never talked about, never thought about since that night. The girl had been hitchhiking, just like so many others. But something had felt wrong. He'd ignored it, picked her up, just like he had so many others. He should have known better. He should have trusted his gut. But he didn't. And then a CCIDENT happened. He remembered the way the lights had blinded him, the screech of metal, the moment of impact, and the sickening crunch as the truck veered off the road. He remembered her face, her wide eyes, the look of terror, the blood on the pavement. Jack had never stopped. He had driven away, left her there, hoping no one would find out. But the guilt had gnawed at him, the memory of her haunting him every day since. It had never stopped, never let him go. And now, the voice on the radio, the voice that knew things no one should know, was pulling it all back to the surface. "Who are you?" Jack whispered, his voice hoarse. He looked at the road, the darkness of the desert stretching out ahead of him. There was nothing, no one, just the endless miles of empty highway. But then, in the distance, something appeared. A set of headlights, coming toward him. Too fast. Too close. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the truck barreled toward him, the lights blinding in the rearview mirror. He slammed on the brakes, but the truck didn't stop. The vehicle behind him was getting closer, and there was no way to outrun it. The radio crackled again. "You can't run, Jack. You never will." His heart pounded in his chest as he slammed the wheel to the side, trying to avoid a collision, but it was too late. The truck behind him hit him with a force that sent his rig spinning off the road, tumbling into the dark abyss of the desert dot. Everything went black. When Jack woke, the world around him was still, eerily quiet. His truck was no longer on the road. It had crashed into the desert sand, its tires buried in the dirt. The air was thick with an unnatural calm, and the only sound was the soft hum of the radio. Crackling with static, Jack pulled himself out of the wreckage, his body aching. The headlights of his truck flickered, casting long shadows across the desert. He stumbled forward, his eyes scanning the horizon, and then, through the darkness, he saw it. A figure, a woman in a red dress, standing in the distance, watching him. Her eyes glowed, empty and hollow, like the void. And the voice on the radio whispered again, "You can never leave, Jack. Not now, not ever." Story 2. The truck stop killer. It was another long haul for Ted Walker, another night behind the wheel of his big rig. The clock on the dashboard read 1:47 a.m., and the dark expanse of Interstate 5 seemed endless. The desert stretched on both sides. Of him, nothing but desolation for miles, save for the occasional lonely billboard or road sign. Ted had been driving for hours, his body aching, his eyelids heavy with the weight of exhaustion. The low hum of the engine and the soft crackling of his CB radio were his only company on this empty stretch of road. His plan was to keep going until he hit the next truck stop. The delivery was urgent, and he was behind schedule, but the longer the night dragged on, the more he found himself needing a break. His stomach growled, and his eyes were starting to blur. So, when a small truck stop appeared on the horizon, Ted didn't hesitate. He pulled off the highway and into the dimly lit parking lot, grateful for the opportunity to rest. The truck stop was quiet. A few rigs were parked in the lot, their drivers likely asleep in their cabs. There was a diner at the far end of the lot, its neon sign flickering faintly in the desert night. Ted pulled his rig into an empty spot and shut off the engine. He took a deep breath, appreciating the brief stillness. He hadn't realized how tense his shoulders had been until the truck stopped moving. Maybe I'll grab a quick bite, stretch my legs, Ted muttered to himself as he climbed out of the cab. The cool night air hit his face, and he shivered slightly. The diner's sign buzzed in the background, casting an eerie glow over the lot. Inside the diner, the place was mostly empty, save for a lone trucker sitting at the counter. The waitress, a woman in her mid-30s with tired eyes, stood behind the counter, cleaning glasses. She glanced up as Ted entered, offering him a tired but polite smile. "Sit anywhere you like," she said, her voice flat, as though she had recited the line 1,000 times. Ted nodded and took a seat at a booth. Near the window, the diner had a grimy, run-down feel to its sticky tables, chipped plates, and an overbearing smell of grease that lingered in the air. He pulled out the menu and scanned it half-heartedly. He wasn't really interested in food at this point. He just wanted to get some rest. The waitress came over and took his order, her expression impassive. "You're the only one here tonight," she said. "Not many trucks passing through these parts at this hour." Ted smiled faintly. "Yeah, it's quiet out there. Too quiet, if you ask me," she muttered, and Ted raised an eyebrow. But before he could respond, she was already walking back to the kitchen. Ted sat back, looking out the window into the empty parking lot, his mind drifting. His peace was short-lived. A loud bang echoed through the diner, followed by the screech of tires. On asphalt, the door slammed open, and a man strode in, his boots clicking sharply on the floor. Ted turned his head, curious, as the man approached the counter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a leather jacket that was clearly worn from years of use. His face was hard, stony, with a 5 o'clock shadow and eyes that seemed to pierce through you. He looked like a man who had seen more than his fair share of trouble. "Coffee," the man barked at the waitress as he took a seat at the counter, not looking at Ted or anyone else. His voice was deep, rough, like it had been dragged across gravel. The waitress didn't respond, just nodded and poured him a cup of coffee. The man didn't thank her, just grabbed the cup and took a long, slow sip, never once looking up. Ted went back to his menu, not wanting to stare, but his curiosity gnawed at him. Something about the man's presence felt off. It wasn't just his size or his gruffness, it was the way he carried himself, like he didn't belong, like he was waiting for something. Ted shook the feeling off, though he was just tired. Probably too much time on the road. His meal arrived soon after, a greasy cheeseburger and fries. He dug in, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling creeping up his spine. It wasn't long before he noticed the man at the counter glancing at him. The man's eyes locked onto Ted's for a moment, his gaze sharp and cold, before he looked away. Ted froze, his mouth full of food. He had been stared down by countless people in his time as a trucker, but this felt different. This wasn't the look of curiosity or indifference, it was the look of someone who was sizing you up, measuring you for something. The man stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He tossed a crumpled bill onto the counter and walked toward the door. But before he exited, he stopped, looked back over his shoulder, and said, You're gonna want to stay in your truck tonight, pal. Don't hang around here too long. Ted blinked, his fork frozen in midair. He wasn't sure what to make of the warning. Was the man just some paranoid drifter, or was there something more to it? He opened his mouth to respond, but the door slammed shut behind the man, leaving Ted alone with his thoughts. The waitress had disappeared into the back, and the other trucker at the counter hadn't said a word, his face hidden behind the newspaper he was reading. Ted finished his meal quickly, then made his way back outside to his truck. The night air felt colder now, the silence more oppressive. He could see his breath forming small clouds in the dim light of the parking lot. He climbed back into the cab of his rig, locking the door behind him. His fingers hovered over the keys, but something made him hesitate. The trucker's warning echoed in his mind, and despite himself, he glanced around the truck stop. Nothing seemed out of place. The parking lot was still empty, save for the few other trucks parked in the corners. He started the engine, the sound of the truck rumbling to life. But just as he shifted into gear, he heard it. A faint sound, a scrape against metal. Something moving in the shadows. Ted's heart skipped a beat. His hand froze on the gear shift. He glanced around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just the dim lights at the truck stop, the stillness of the desert night. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the unease creeping up on him. But then there was another sound closer this time. A low thud, followed by the scrape of metal against metal. The sound came from behind his truck. Ted's stomach churned. Maybe it's just the wind, he thought, trying to rationalize it. But deep down, he knew it wasn't the wind. Slowly, he reached for the CB radio. His fingers trembled as he keyed it. Breaker, breaker, anyone out there? Ted said, trying to keep his voice steady. Any other trucks at this stop? There was a long pause, followed by static. Then a voice, low and cautious, crackled through. Big Rig 35 here. You good, man? Ain't nothing going on here. Ted breathed a sigh of relief. The other trucker sounded calm, but there was something in his voice, a hint of nervousness that sent a shiver down Ted's spine. You hear anything weird? Scraping sounds? Ted asked, glancing nervously at the parking lot behind him. Nah, nothing like that. You sure you're okay? The voice replied. Ted paused, his mind racing. The scrape came again. It was closer this time, almost right outside his door. Ted's blood ran cold. Then, in the distance, he saw it. A figure, moving fast through the shadows, faster than he should have been able to. The figure was wearing dark clothes, a hooded jacket, and there was something about the way they moved that didn't seem natural. Ted's hand moved to the door handle, but before he could open it, he heard the voice again. Stay in the truck. Man, get out of there. Before Ted could respond, the figure lunged toward him. A split second later, the sound of glass shattering filled the air, and the figure was at his door, pulling at the handle. Ted's instincts kicked in. He slammed his foot on the accelerator and threw the truck into gear, roaring away from the truck stop, leaving the figure and the darkness behind. He didn't stop driving until he hit the next town, his heart still pounding in his chest. The next morning, Ted went back to that truck stop. It was still early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The lot was empty, quiet. There was no sign of the figure, no trace of what had happened. But when Ted walked up to the diner, he found the waitress sitting at the counter, her face pale and worn. She didn't meet his eyes as he approached. You didn't see anything last night, did you? Ted asked, his voice shaky. The Waitress finally looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "You're not the first. He's done this before. He only comes for those who don't listen, for those who stay too long." Ted took a step back, suddenly realizing the horror that had just barely missed him. "Who is he?" Ted whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached under the counter and pulled out an old, cracked photograph. The figure in the photo was tall, shadowy, and dressed in dark clothes. His eyes were black as night. "He's the truck stop killer," she said, her voice trembling. "And you should have listened when he warned you." Story 1. The ghostly hitchhiker. It was the middle of the night when Steve Riley's truck crossed the California border. The old rig hummed steadily, its headlights cutting through the inky darkness of the desert highway. Steve had been behind the wheel for nearly 12 hours, and the fatigue was beginning to settle in like a thick fog. He could feel his eyelids growing heavier with each passing mile. It was always like this during long hauls. Just him, the road, and the endless hum of his truck. But tonight, something felt different. There was an unease in the air, a sense that something was watching him, waiting for him to slip up. Steve shook the thought from his head. He had been driving for over 15 years, and nothing had ever happened to him on these long, lonely stretches of road. He was a seasoned trucker, a man who had seen it all. Nothing out here could surprise him, or so he thought. The stretch of highway he was on was one of the loneliest in the state. It had been hours since he'd seen another vehicle, and the only sounds were the occasional crackle of the CB radio and the whir of the tires on the road. The desert around him was vast, unbroken, a sea of sand and rocks stretching out to the horizon. That's when he saw her. At first, Steve thought he was imagining things. He was so tired, after all. But as the rig drew closer, he saw her clearly. A young woman standing by the side of the road, her thumb raised high, hoping for a ride. Steve's heart sank. It was always a bad idea to pick up hitchhikers, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. You never knew who you might end up with. But then again, the woman didn't look dangerous. She was dressed in a simple white dress, her long hair flowing in the wind like she had stepped out of another time. Her eyes were wide, almost pleading, as she looked up at him. The eerie stillness of the desert, the way she stood motionless by the side of the road, it was all so strange. He was alone out here. She looked so lost, so vulnerable. Steve hesitated. He knew it was risky, but he couldn't just leave her out here. Not when he could help. He pulled over slowly, the tires crunching on the gravel. The woman didn't move. She stood there, her figure silhouetted against the dark desert night. Steve rolled down the window, trying to hide the unease in his voice. "Need a ride?" he called out, his eyes scanning her face. The woman nodded, stepping forward as she opened the passenger door. She climbed into the cab without a word, her movements stiff, like she was in a trance. Steve glanced at her, trying to make sense of it all. There was something odd about her, something not quite right. "Where are you headed?" he asked, trying to fill the silence. He needed to break the tension that had begun to settle between them. The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes, pale and distant, never left the road ahead of them. Miss Steve asked again, his voice a little firmer this time. "Where are you headed?" The woman's lips parted, and she spoke in a soft, almost ghostly voice. "I'm going to the end of the road." Steve frowned, puzzled. "The end of the road," he repeated, glancing at her quickly. "Where's that?" She turned her head slowly to face him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "Where the road ends," she said again, her voice low and ethereal. "Where everything ends." Steve shifted uncomfortably in his seat. There was something about her eyes, something unnerving. He could feel his unease growing, but he didn't know why. He told himself it was just the fatigue, the isolation of the desert. He needed to focus on the road, to keep moving. "Okay. All right," Steve muttered, trying to dismiss the unsettling feeling. "Just sit back and relax. We'll get you where you're going." But the silence between them grew thicker as they drove. The woman didn't speak again. She simply sat there, staring ahead, as though lost in some distant thought. Steve tried to keep his mind on the road, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. The air in the cab had become heavy, suffocating, and he could feel the weight of her presence beside him. It was like something invisible was hanging between them, like she was somehow pulling at him. "Are you all right?" he asked after a long while. "You don't look well." The woman's head turned slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly as she regarded him. There was a faint smile on her lips, but it was unsettling. It didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she said softly. "But you're not fine, are you?" Steve furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" Her smile deepened, but it wasn't comforting. It was like a mask, hiding something far darker beneath it. "You've been on the road too long. You've seen too much." Steve's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He tried to laugh it off, but there was an edge to her words that made him uneasy. "What's that supposed to mean?" She didn't answer, her gaze fixed on him. The tension in the truck thickened, and Steve could feel his pulse quickening. The quiet was almost unbearable now, like the world around them had grown to still, too silent. He glanced at the clock, 3 a.m. Still a few hours before the next town, and no sign of life out here. The woman's voice broke through the silence once more. "You're not the first to pick me up. You won't be the last." Her words hit him like a cold slap, and Steve's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice rising. He was done with this strange game, but she only smiled again, that same eerie smile that sent a chill through his chest. "You'll see, we all see. All those who pick me up, ... They see, they know." Steve's hands were sweating now, his heart hammering in his chest. The temperature in the truck had dropped, but the air felt thick, suffocating. He stole a glance at the woman. Her eyes were no longer just distant, they were empty, black as night, with no light behind them. And her smile, God, that had twisted into something monstrous, something that shouldn't have been possible. The woman suddenly leaned in closer, her breath cold against his ear. "You're driving the wrong way, Jack." His blood froze. He hadn't told her his name. He had never told her his name. "Who are you?" he gasped, his hands tightening on the wheel. The truck seemed to lurch as he fought to keep it steady. But before he could react, she was gone, vanished. The seat next to him was empty. Her presence evaporated as quickly as it had arrived, leaving only a cold, empty space where she had been. Steve slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt on the side of the road. His breath was ragged, his hands shaking. He turned to the passenger seat, but it was empty. There was no sign of her anywhere. The highway was empty, nothing but the faint glow of his headlights stretching into the desert. What the hell just happened? He whispered to himself, his heart still racing. He sat there for a long moment, too scared to move, too scared to do anything but stare at the empty road ahead. The stillness of the desert pressed in around him, suffocating. But then he saw its reflection in the side mirror. A figure standing by the side of the road. It was her, the woman in the white dress. She was standing there, just out of the range of his headlights, her back to him. Her head lowered. Without thinking, Steve put the truck in gear and floored the accelerator. Speeding away into the night, the haunting image of the woman in the mirror seared into his mind. Hours later, Steve arrived at a truck stop near a small town. He was exhausted, shaken, but he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. He pulled into a parking spot, got out of the truck, and walked into the diner. Still reeling from the encounter, the waitress behind the counter smiled at him as he took a seat. "You're the last one for the night," she said, handing him a menu. "Long drive." Steve nodded, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, you could say that." The waitress tilted her head slightly, studying him with a strange look. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Steve's blood ran cold. "What?" She smiled, but it wasn't comforting. "The girl in the white dress. You've seen her, haven't you?" Steve's breath caught in his throat. "She only appears to those who are far enough out on the road," the waitress continued. "The ones who drive past the point of no return. It's too late for you now." Steve's head spun as the words sank in. He had picked her up. He had driven the wrong way. And now, he was part of the road's curse. "Too late," the waitress whispered, her voice low and knowing. "We all see her eventually." As Steve sat in the diner, the weight of the waitress's words settled over him like a cold shroud. The woman in the white dress was no mere hitchhiker. She was the road's curse, and now he was part of it. Had seen the truth. The road never let go. The diner's lights flickered ominously, and Steve knew, deep down, that the night had only just begun. Are you ready to face the road's darkest secrets? Beware the hitchhiker that never leaves. If you see her, don't stop. Once you pick her up, you'll never drive away. The ghostly hitchhiker, a trucker's worst nightmare.